For the longest time, my wife and I always were living off of IKEA furniture. And so when it came to our new house, we decided we wanted to make something special. My wife had found something on a website that was like a blog site of a desk in the background, and she asked me if it was possible. After some internet sleuthing, I was able to figure out the name of the table and the company. The company's price was a little bit higher than what we were expecting to pay for something like this. So I immediately went to YouTube and tried to figure out the best way to build what we needed. After going to Home Depot and getting a couple 4x4s, decided to sketch out and kind of measure what we wanted. Took me a while, but then I finally realized that to ultimately make this the best desk possible, I needed to have some sort of planer to be able to plane the boards flat. So back to YouTube again, and I found out how to make a router sled. So I spent maybe a total of $10, and I created this really cool router sled that allowed me to plane the boards completely flat and make them very consistent. I'll admit that it was a couple tries here and there was some trial and error, but eventually I got it to the point where things were virtually unstoppable. Here's a few test runs that I did. As you can tell, I was going back and forth, just making sure that I was getting everything right. And then I went across all the boards. Ended up realizing that I needed to have some sort of stopgap to get to the end. So there was that. Then I was looking at the end grain and I wanted to create a sort of wave motion. So as you can tell here, it kind of goes down, up, down, up, down, up, really creating a really cool visual effect. So then came the gluing, and this was probably one of the most challenging parts because I did not have clamps large enough to do the entire board. So I had to do two different sections and then eventually stack them on top of each other and just hope that everything worked out. Here's where I created the hold so it didn't get off the rails. And so after that, I went ahead and began planing the boards as one piece. And this took a little while, lots of sawdust, lots of mess, but eventually it ended up really turning out exactly how I anticipated it. So then there were the gaps to fill in between. So I took some of the leftover sawdust that I had and mixed it with wood glue and just filled in all the little gaps that were missing. And then eventually got tired of that and just started filling it with wood glue, almost like an epoxy. So then I had to go back and replane it with everything pretty much done, just taking off just a very little bit. And then again, back to filling in whatever gaps were remaining. Back to planing it again. As you can tell, really, really messy situation here. But the final product ended up being exactly what I believed it needed to be. Some of the epoxy looking fills there with the wood glue. And then I began to take a hand sander to completely finish it off. And what I realized was, when doing that, the grain that was showing was standing up, and then the other grain that was lower and softer was being removed much quicker. So I had to kind of create a quick plan to kind of just live with what I had instead of removing all the soft wood and leaving the hardwood with an uneven tabletop. Next, we went ahead and started working the legs. This was also some trial and error on how to properly secure the legs into the A form that we ended up with. This was a test run here that I was just trying to see what it looked like and kind of like how I was going to do it. Had to figure out all the measurements of the angles and have the crossbar at the bottom to make sure that everything was sturdy. Pocket holes, I knew that I would fill in the long run. So So then when I came up with a plan, I decided to just start cutting wood at the angles that I needed, and then began assembling. These are just simple 2x4s that I put together, and it wasn't really anything too crazy. Always making sure they were level. Had to make sure that was the case. Ended up borrowing a neighbor's miter saw because mine was a little bit off. This was me documenting the degree that I ended up with for the crossbars. Eventually I had to cut off the end of the table that was just hanging out there, so I have a radial saw here that wasn't thick enough to go through the entire table, so I had to do one pass on this side, and then I ended up flipping it and doing another pass on the other side. Turned out really well, actually. Was able to sand off any difference, which was very minor. And so then eventually we were like, okay, let's go ahead and put this tabletop together. This was the A-frame. And here's another idea that I had of creating like a joint here, and I was going to use pegs to fill in the pockets, but that ended up not being the case in the long run. I just ended up getting really long screws. Here are the crossbars. Ironically, they were both different on each end of the table, slightly off by like less than an inch. I wanted to make sure it was flush with the tabletop. And here's me assembling, or actually drilling all the pocket holes at once, doing some rough sanding just to kind of knock down a little bit of stuff that was created from the drill. Good view. And then I started cutting all the little pegs that I was going to fill in to kind of create some support and stability on the inside of each joint. This was like a 1/4 inch peg dowel that I did. And then created another measurement here. Created a stopgap on the miter saw. And these would have been right here on the crossbars. So I taped off my drill bit to know how far I wanted to drill in. Had 2 marks on each board. Drill bit wasn't in all the way, as you can tell. So here I am, quickly putting the A-frame together with pegs. And what I did was, I kind of got away from the peg idea on the crossbar, and I did some countersink holes, where I just drilled larger drill bits, bought some really long screws, and just drilled them through. Here I was having a hard time getting the drill bit all the way down in. However, I was able to do it, and it actually looked really good. And then for the countersink holes, I used those pegs that I had cut earlier, and then took a Japanese saw after the fact, and I went ahead and just sawed them off, creating a nice flush feel to the A-frame, also hiding the screws. Just gave it another little unique texture on the sides that you could see. Oh, there's a mustache. Gotta get that in the picture. Lots of sanding. Lots of sanding. These weren't exactly done yet. I want to get a good look of a finished product next to a raw product. Looks really good. So then I needed to route the pocket out because the legs are going to sit inside of the top of the table, just underneath the bottom right there, so they don't move around. Here you can see I was just making sure I knew, and there was the cutout. It's a little bit square and the block was a little bit rounded, but I think it fit pretty well otherwise. You can always go back and round that out with something filled with putty or something, and create like a rounded feel. This was the first time I was putting it all together. Just wanted to kind of see how it looked. As you can tell on the right, there's a little bit of a gap, but once I swapped the table out there, you can tell that it wasn't that big of a deal. Someone at work gave me this hand plane to kind of not knock down so much of the soft wood and just kind of like catch the top. Could never get a hang of it, so I kind of gave up on it and went back to the sanding. And here's when I decided to put like a nice little clear coat over top. Ended up kind of bringing the colors together in a way. Held them. They ended up kind of blending a little bit better. They're not 100% together, but here's the finished product. As you can tell, I think it's pretty good. Definitely stands out when you walk into our living room. And bonus points because my wife was very pleased, and this ended up being the desk that she has worked at during the entire time during COVID. So thanks for watching, and look forward to keeping this table for a really long time and hopefully passing it down, or just always using it as some sort of feature in our house. Thanks a lot.